We are so honored to be hosting Sandra E Jones, the author of Voices of Milwaukee Bronzeville. We have had wonderful reads. The reviews are spectacular. And our own Tim McCarthy has written, some people don't have to imagine what Milwaukee's Bronzeville was like. They only have to remember. They recall Walnut Street alive with businesses serving a hardworking Black population, making something out of meager resources. They describe religious establishments such as St. Mark's Methodist Episcopal, St. Benedict the Moor, Calvary Baptist, and St. Matthew CME, attending to the spiritual life and remembering the Flame, the Metropole, and the Satin Doll nightclubs, taking care of entertainment and secular needs. Above all, they recollect a people looking out for the well-being of all within its realm, gathering interviews with residents of the now almost vanished neighborhood. Dr. Sandra E Jones reimagines Bronzeville not just as a place, but as a spirit engendered by people determined to make a way out of no way. Sandra E Jones has lived her entire life in Milwaukee. She earned a doctorate from UWM and served as assistant professor in the Department of African and African Diaspora Studies, and as assistant director of the UWM Cultures and Communities Curriculum Development Program. We are so extra honored to have Dr. Jones in conversation with Sharon Adams, co-founder of Walnut Way Conservation Corp. And co-developer of Adams Garden Park. Please give them a big hand. Thank you so much.
Hello. Hello. I can't tell you how happy I am to see you all here tonight. It's a joy. I'm happy to be here with my friend and colleague and sister, Sharon Adams, and we're just gonna do a little talking. So Sharon and I agreed on a little kind of a format, and we agreed that I was going to start. Sharon asked me, how did you get invited in to do this work? And there's two parts to that question. The first is, I love history. I love the study of what came before us and what we can learn from that. And I love Milwaukee, and I love Black people. And so it's the history of my people in the city is of great interest and great importance to me. So that's one part of the answer. And the other part of the answer is my friend Bill Nolan, who's sitting right here. I told you I was going to do this, Bill. Listening to his stories, listening to him talk about growing up in Milwaukee. And Bill has 3 friends, and on Fridays pre-COVID, they would get together at his house and reminisce, and they just talk and they tell stories and that kind of thing. And it was just so interesting, their memories, the clarity that they remembered that time was just so precious. And so I just barged in with my tape recorder. They allowed me to talk with them and record them. And, we do it in groups, and they talk loud and over each other and, and that kind of thing. And then I interviewed them separately because I wanted to get, not just the stories of, what the community was like, but I wanted to get their personal histories. And so that led me next door to my other dear friend who's here tonight, Mamie Thurman. She lives on the corner. And I asked her if she wouldn't mind being interviewed. And she said, of course. And so I went down to her house, and she had pictures and letters. And, she's a historian. She really is. And so she agreed to be a part of the project. And I was thrilled. And I can't not mention my dear friend Annie Nolan, who is here with her husband, Bill. When Bill and I would be talking, Annie would be, offering her clarifications. And so that's and then Bill's friends. I had the great honor to interview Reuben Harpo and some others. I had the great honor to interview George Sanders, who unfortunately is no longer with us. He passed away about 3 months ago at the age of 90. He was a great activist, journalist, photographer, graphic artist. So can we just take a minute just to honor his memory? Thank you. Thank you very much. So I had a great opportunity, a great entrance into what Milwaukee was like in the past through these folks. And I was very honored and privileged to be able to share their stories, hear their stories, and share their stories. And, I will be forever grateful. So now I'm going to pass it over to Sharon Adams.
So if you know Sandra, you know that she will make a request. And she said, I have a big request of you. And I said, okay. And then she told me that she'd like me to read the script, her book. It was draft, and would I read it? And I said, absolutely. And so I started reading it. And I thought, what an honor to read it at this point. This is my Milwaukee. I grew up here. I was born here. So I made a few suggestions. I mostly praised this effort and looked to the day that it would be published. And then Sandra said, we were chatting and talking, and somehow it came out that my birthday was in 1947. So she said, oh, can I interview you? And so I either got a promotion, but I definitely was replaced. And I was stunned and honored. And it's a funny thing at 74 to be the youngest person interviewed. So I was invited in, and it's so good to be in where I've always been. And I thank you, Sandra.
Well, thank you for agreeing to be in. And so we just want to, do it casually, but we want to talk about, some of the things that are in the book. Talk about some of the history of Black Milwaukee. Very often when you read about the history of Black Milwaukee, and there's very little to read, I'll just make that point. When you read about it, you read about the businesses on Wall Street, which was extremely important. Milwaukee's population, Black population, was segregated very early on in a certain segment of the city. Many resources weren't available to that population. And so what did they do? They made their own. They created their own. So they built those businesses to service their population. They did not go without. Anything they needed, they created. And that's a part of the history of Black Milwaukee. But what's missing, what I found missing, is what it was like to grow up as the people, what it was like to grow up in Milwaukee during that time. And so I wanted to focus this effort on the people. The other thing I wanted to do is, I didn't necessarily want to talk about the hardships. what I wanted to talk about was the joy, because there was great joy in early Black Milwaukee. And that's the thing that I found when I talked to all the folks that I interviewed for this book. They talked about the physical landscape. They talked about the sense of community. They talked about where they got their values from, where they got their work ethic from. You know, they got it from their parents. They got it from watching the adults in their lives, where they got their sense of caring. That also came from their families and so on. And so that's what I wanted to focus on, the people. So I was fortunate enough to get, pre-COVID, 8 people to join me in the project. And, you know, so that's where the focus came from. And that's how that got started.
So when Sandra mentions joy, that was our life. That was my life. Except I didn't know I lived in Bronzeville. I knew that I lived in a number of places. I lived on 7th and Clark with my aunt and uncle, the Geises, in a duplex. I lived and still live again on 17th and North. What I knew was that I lived with family, and I lived in a block where everyone knew me and I knew what to do. And I knew that if I didn't do what to do, my parents would know rather quickly. So I was a little bit amazed about calling this the Voices of Bronzeville. I think it's good. I think that's a period of time, but what it really is and what it means so much to me about, it's that it's the voices of people who made a way, who loved each other, who had fun. And I just want to tell you a little bit about one of those marks of fun. So may I do this?
Yes, please.
So on a Saturday night, my father had worked all week, usually 2 jobs, sometimes more than that. And my mother would start cooking. So I want you to smell the roast. I want you to smell the candied yams and the macaroni and cheese. Are you smelling it? Because you could have it every Saturday night. We ate well every night. But what was special about Saturday night was that the people that he had worked with, some of them would come over and they would bring out a beverage and they would play cards. And so early on, I learned about being occupied by occupying yourself with your family. And so it did not feel like a tired man coming home after being on the railroad in the cold. It felt like a man, my father and mother, who loved us, loved me, and a family gathering. So when Sandra asked about joy, it was just the way we lived. And I think that is why it's so important that you wrote this book.
I think what I want to do now is I want to talk about how the book formed itself. I didn't go in with questions, although, you know, I needed family background and that kind of thing, but I didn't necessarily go in with a list of questions that, you know, that I wanted to pose to the folks that I was interviewing. I just let them lead me, and they told me what was important to them. One of the places to a person where they took me was to Lapham Park.
Oh, yeah.
Lapham Park was the community gathering place. It's where Bob Mosley said it this way: at some point during the day, everybody in Bronzeville stopped at Lapham Park, and they played baseball and basketball. The community center there had classes. So it was, they said, we didn't even know, and remember, these are, at this point, these guys are like 8 and 10 years old. They didn't even know where each other lived. They never asked where they lived. They built their relationships and their friendships at Lapham Park. And, you know, to think about that, how important that place, that center was for them, just really impressed me. You know, it really impressed me. And to think that center was taken away, you know, saddens me. But so that's one of the places they took me to. Another place that they led me in conversation was the idea, the importance, how they gained the importance of work, that work ethic that they all carried with them through their life. And again, you know, they started from when they were kids. First of all, watching their parents every day go out to do the things that was necessary to take care of their families. Sharon told me that every job her father worked at, she went along with him. He was he worked at the Milwaukee Railroad, and he was one of the guys who
Switched the trains.
And so Sharon would be there with him, you know, when he was doing that work. He owned a tavern.
Mhm.
And she would be after school, she would walk from school to the tavern, you know, where he worked. He had a cleaning company. And so, and all of the others said that too. Joe Deku, who is one of the folks that I interviewed, he talked about being raised by a single mother for a good portion of his life, and not having the resources to get the kind of things that kids wanted, you know, the clothes or, you know, that kind of thing. And so what did he do? And what did they all do? They went out and found that they got paper routes. They collected cans and bottles. Joe says, you know, you could get 2 cents for a Coke bottle back in those days. But they found a way to get, you know, as kids, the money to do the kind of things to get the extras that they wanted. He said his mother could put a roof over his head and feed him, but to get that extra. And so that work ethic was instilled in him. Later on, he got a job in a child's restaurant, is the name of it. And he talked about as a teenager working on a potato farm on the outskirts of the city. And when he would come home, he would be so filthy from working that his mother would stop him in the yard. She'd turn a hose on him and wash him down, and then take him upstairs and put him in the bathtub. But that work ethic, you know, was one of the places that they led me
And I
in
think
conversation.
the work was so tied to the education. My father never missed a parent-teacher meeting. He was there because he knew that education was a route. So yes, work is something we did. We did it early, we did it consistently, and some of us are still doing it. And it's such a joy then to pass that on. And I want to tie it really close to that real value of education and being creative at the same time. I told Sandra that I made a little error once. just once. I said, oh, I'm so bored. And my mother said, you bored, are you? And then came out assignments, there was house cleaning, there was writing. I was never bored again. And this wasn't just me, it was my friends. We knew how to be of service. And I can remember my mother preparing large dishes of food for a neighbor on the block who was ill. So it wasn't something that I had to be taught. It was something that I lived, and I lived it with others. We took care of each other. And we were never, ever bored.
You know, I got that sense talking to folks, you know, that children were so important.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and the mentoring of children. I always tell this story about Joe Gans. Bill is laughing because this is a story that involves him. So Joe Gans worked, they call him Baby Joe Gans. He worked at the Urban League. The Urban League was a really important institution in Black Milwaukee back in the day. People would come who migrated from the South and other places, would always stop at the Urban League because they had all kinds of resources there. They had help people find jobs, housing, food, and those kind of things. So it was very important. One of the things they had was a youth program, a boxing program. And so Bill told me this story about he and another 8-year-old kid were out in the street and they were just duking. They were fighting over something. Bill, do you remember what you were fighting over? No, no idea, but they were out there just fighting. And so Baby Joe Gann comes out from the Urban League, and he grabs them both by the collar, picks them up, and he takes them into the basement of the Urban League, puts them in a boxing ring, sticks 16-ounce gloves on their hand, and tells them, okay, go to it. And he said that they just fought. They could hardly lift the gloves. They got so tired that they just eventually just fell out, And when Bill told me that story, he said, that was just mean. And I said, no, Bill, that wasn't mean. That was love. That was caring. That was showing you how to take that, whatever it was, the dispute or whatever it was, and deal with it in a constructive way, in a different way. And another story that Bobby told me is about this torn up old magazine, comic book that he had, and a friend of his wanted that magazine. And he said, I'll give you $20 for it. And so Bobby said, okay. And so the next day the kid brings $20. And so he gives, and Bobby, he's in heaven. He says, he took that $20 and they went to the corner store and he was buying candy for everybody, he says. Then the store owner talked to the kid's teacher, and the kid's teacher talked to the mother and found out that $20 came out of her purse. And, so she got her $20 back. Bobby got his comic book back. But you see that network of caring, that network of connection and communication. And that was part of the spirit of Bronzeville. All the stories that people told, the ones that you talked about, Sharon, all the church, all those, that's the spirit of Bronzeville. That's what life in Bronzeville was like.
Sandra, you mentioned mentoring. We may not have called it mentoring. It was maybe leadership development, maybe doing what you're going to do. But there was the church. And it was a place where you learn that you are so valued and you valued others. And there was a spirit that was larger than all of us. I just want to say that last week I was with a friend. Some of you may know her, Margaret Henningsen. And we can't remember when we met, because we met in that church when we were infants. And we were sitting in a gathering with over 1,200 people. And 2 teenagers were asked to come to the front of the room and to speak. And I reached over to Margaret and I said, St. Matthew CME Church. They prepared us to be confident and caring and tell our stories in front of small groups and large groups. And I'm forever grateful. I thought that's the way it was. That was the way we grew up, sitting on the pew, with people, and we did our growing that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
On the topic of mentoring.
Yeah. The other thing that the folks in the book talked about was the churches that they went to. One of the really important institutions in Black Milwaukee that we really don't know a whole lot about was St. Benedict's.
Mm-hmm.
A number of the folks who I interviewed went to school at St. Benedict's. They went to church at St. Benedict's. St. Benedict's in the very early on 1900s, really end of the 1800s, really started an attempt to bring African Americans into the Catholic Church. And St. Benedict's is one of the institutions in Milwaukee that was involved in that. And so there is a large Catholic, even today, a large Catholic, African-American Catholic population in Milwaukee that is a part of the history, but we really don't know a whole lot about it. A number of the folks who I interviewed, Miss Thurman, for example, she went to St. Benedict's for school, for church. When her family moved to Milwaukee, her father came in 1906. So he was one of the very first African Americans in Milwaukee. But at that time, I think there were maybe 300 Black people in Milwaukee. And they lived on State Street. They lived where the safety building is now. They lived in a house just across the street from the safety building. That was a residential area. But it was right across the street or right down the way from St. Benedict's. So it was a natural fit that Black folks, because early Black residents settled in the downtown area, even on the east side, even on the south side. You know, there was no restriction at that time. And so that's where she grew up. That's where Miss Thurman grew up, where she went to school, where they went to church. Bobby also spent his entire education at St. Benedict's. So it played a really important role in the history of Black Milwaukee. And then, you know, Sharon's church, St. Mark's, that's where Bill went. But churches also played a very important role in early Black Milwaukee in providing resources and spiritual health to the people in Black Milwaukee. Sharon talked about your church and the clubs that would form around the places where people came from. So you had the Mississippi Club,
Tennessee
the
Club.
Tennessee Club,
the Arkansas Club. And we would say that now that people were bringing their culture and their experiences to this church, because as Blacks, we were coming from all different places. And we knew the difference. We knew what hot cornbread tastes like from Tennessee. And those are little, but they're so important. Not only was it food, it was the stories, the generational stories that were told by the club members. And so you had clubs that were named after the states, and the states were where the people had come from. And the diversity that put in us is something that I cherish.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit about how people entertained themselves back in old Milwaukee, in old Black Milwaukee. Card parties were really big. You know, of course, we know about the clubs on Walnut Street and that kind of thing, but especially for women, they did more of their, got more of their entertainment in their homes. So card parties was a really big thing during the time, and they'd have these round robins. And card parties served as entertainment, but there was also an economic component to it. The economic component was there was this pot, and people would contribute to the pot. And the people who hosted the party would get a cut from the pot. And that was one of the ways that people paid rent and all kind, you know, bought groceries and, you know, that kind of thing. So, but it was really big. And Bill says, I'm sorry to be messing with you so much tonight, Bill. But Bill says that that's how they all learned how to gamble. He said, that's why we gamble today. He says, we go down to Potawatomi. He says, Miss Thurman was just down there yesterday. But, you know, that was a part of the life. That was a part of the community too. The other thing that I found just fascinating was the policy game. The policy game is the numbers game. And, you know, today we call it the lottery. But back then it was, you know, really big in the Black community. And so they would have policy takers, and they would go to around the community, and people could play a nickel, they could play a dime, and, you know, they could get some big money, according to Bill. They could get some big money back then. And so it was illegal. So it had to be all undercover, you know, surreptitious activity, you know. And so Bill's mother used to watch out for the police. There was a police box on the corner, and she would keep an eye out, you know, when the game was over and they were, you know, counting them, about to pull the numbers. And if the police would pick up the phone, they would know somebody was getting raided, and she'd call the number and say, they're looking at you. And that would give everybody heads up to, you know, to get out. But I found that whole project fascinating. And today, somebody is making millions and millions of dollars, the state, off of that concept, you know, the policy. That kind of thing. There's so many stories that I gathered and I heard from these folks. Many of them are in the book, some of them are not. So maybe that might be volume 2. I don't know. But here's what's important. That was such an important moment in Milwaukee's history, in Black Milwaukee's history. And we have to gather that, you know, it has to be collected. When I was doing research about Black Milwaukee, boy, I can tell you it was so scarce. You know, there's so little. These folks' memories are clear. You know, that story about Joe Gann, when I did my research, I found out that Joe Gann died before Bill was born. But then when I typed in Milwaukee Joe Gann, there he was, he showed up. So I said, okay, the memory is fine. But these guys have the stories, and we have to collect those stories and record that life, because it's so very important. I started out the book with the history of Blacks in Wisconsin and earlier Blacks in Milwaukee, because that history is very scarce too. And, you know, I found out about the Bonga family in northern Wisconsin, who the first Bongas came to northern Michigan, and they came as slaves on a British ship. And when the captain died, they gained their freedom. They stayed in the area. They raised a family, and they did work as fur traders in northern Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota. And there's a long history there. I learned that the first Black woman doctor, the first woman doctor in the state, was a Black woman named Marianne LaBouche. Those people and colonies of Blacks, small colonies of Blacks in Perry de Chine, and those guys. So it's there, but it's not recorded. And that kind of history is so important, not just for prosperity, but for the future. We need that. So that was one of the benefits I got from doing the work.
Well, I think one of the areas that really touched me was what I started to remember. And one of the things I remembered was how we measured time. And it's very different than wearing a watch. And Sandra asked me, what do you mean? I said, well, I knew that at a certain point I needed to be at Lapham Park. I knew that when the street lights start to come on, I need to be at home. I knew when it was time to relax and read and pray. So time was not measured as we often measure it today. What is one of the first things you might look at when you get up? It's your clock or your watch, and what time is it? Then it's not dark yet, but my mother's in the kitchen and she's cooking my father's breakfast. Time was measured by the quality of our life and what was expected of us. And I'm forever grateful to you, Sandra Jones, for reminding me of some of these memories and the opportunity to share how we constructed our lives, to be supportive, to be nurturing, and through the hard times as well as the good times. There were challenges, but when you mentioned that children were protected, many of us were so protected from the hard times. I told Sandra this, that it wasn't until I went to the University of Wisconsin that I had the notion that I might have been poor. And how did that come about? Well, my professor was talking about 53205. He didn't say I was poor. He said everybody in 53205 was poor. So that would include me. So I came home and I asked my mother a simple question. Are we poor? And she said, you know, I'm a college student. And she said, do you feel poor? And that was the end of that conversation. So again, I thank you for letting me remember some of these stories. I also thank you for letting me know how, although I'm like the closure of this special period of time. Ms. Thurman, your son lives in my life. We are another generation maybe, but you kept us together that we are still so close now. And that's what our elders did for the elders. And tonight I had dinner with a friend I hadn't seen in many years, and we grew up together. And I had the honor and privilege of keeping her mother's belongings, her china, because we had china, Sunday dinners, in our house. And she came from Chicago to get her mother's candy dish. And we talked about this book, and we talked about how important it was for us to be able to tell our stories, and that what a candy dish meant. So I thank you for that. I don't think the work is done. I think and hope that there is more to come.
Well, you know, that's a good opening for our last question. Last part of this conversation. What has happened since the book has been published? One of the things that's happened is people are remembering things now. You know, one of the guys I interviewed in the book, Raymond Washington, he came over after the book was published, and he brought all kinds of things. He brought pictures, and he brought more stories. You know, I hear more stories from all of the folks. So, you know, like I say, maybe there's a volume 2 coming, but it is when you start this work, what it does is it leads you to other places. It leads you to more history. And, you know, again, it's extremely important for us to mine that, to gather that history, to collect it and record it for our children. I teach at UWM, and I teach some history courses and that kind of thing. And you bring up Bronzeville, until recently, students didn't know anything about it. They did not know about you know, early Black Milwaukee. And it's important for them to know this, because there's so much that we can learn from that history, how to survive. And Lord knows we need some lessons on how to survive today, you know, with all the things that are confronting us, and especially confronting our young people. So that's one of the things. And then one of Joe Deku, he and Raymond came over one afternoon after the book was published, and I had copies for them, and I had written little messages to them, and they were sitting at my dining room table and looking at the book. It's the first time they had seen it, and they were looking at the pictures that, you know, of each other that they had never seen before, and then they started signing each other's book. You know, I said, "Oh my God, this is great." But then Joe called me later that afternoon, and he said, "You know, I'm reading what you put in the book. I'm reading my words, and it's bringing back so many memories." He said, "It's like I'm being born again." And it just floored me, because it was at that point that I realized how important it is for these folks, ordinary folks, to have their lives recognized, you know, to have it put in a book and preserved for history. That's extremely important. So,
And Sandra, we
yes.
want to recognize you for recognizing us. Melody, would you come forward?
Oh. What have you done?
I'm gonna take this microphone from you for a minute. I need to stand up. So it's been a joy to see your book published and how important it is to Milwaukee. And so I'm going to read this out loud to everybody here. The city of Milwaukee proudly joins Boswell Books readers and community members in honoring Dr. Sandra E Jones on Thursday, November 18th, 2021. And whereas Dr. Sandra E Jones is a proud Milwaukee native who attended Milwaukee Public Schools and despite many hardships, received her GED from Milwaukee Area Technical College and later achieved her BA, MA, and PhD in English and Literary Studies from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And whereas Dr. Sandra E Jones has been an active member of the community since her teenage years, demonstrated by her service as a member of the Milwaukee Free Angela Davis Committee, the Justice for Ernest Lacey Coalition, her tireless work focused on school desegregation issues in the city, her service as a commissioner on the Milwaukee Social Development Board of Commissioners, the Advisory Board of Public Allies Milwaukee, and is currently serving as the chairperson on the Board of Directors for the Victory Garden Initiative. And whereas Dr. Sandra E Jones dutifully served the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee as the assistant professor in the Department of African and African Diaspora Studies and as the assistant director of the Cultures and Communities Program. And whereas Dr. Sandra E Jones has been recognized for her outstanding work as a University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee staff member and as a notable leader in the LGBTQ community by the Shepherd Express LGBTQ Progress Awards. And whereas Dr. Sandra E Jones has interviewed and engaged community elders in her research on the history of Milwaukee's vibrant Bronzeville neighborhood and has published a book highlighting their recollections with historical and new photographs from people still living in the Bronzeville neighborhood and surrounding areas. And whereas the city of Milwaukee commends Dr. Sandra E Jones for her extraordinary work in Milwaukee, her countless achievements, and the publication of her book, Voices of Milwaukee Bronzeville, and wishes her success in all future endeavors. Now, therefore, I, Tom Barrett, Mayor of the City of Milwaukee, do hereby proclaim Thursday, November 18th, 2021, to be Dr. Sandra E Jones Day. Here we go. I'll put that on the easel for you.
Wow. I don't know what to say. Are there any questions? Wow.
Five questions. We want to have 5%.
Okay.
Make them good.
All right. Are there any questions? I'm just overwhelmed.
That's okay, I'll take that.
Okay.
Are there any questions? You got room for 5 questions? We want to make sure you get your book. Okay, I see a hand up. Come to the mic or talk really loud. I prefer you come to the mic or we'll repeat it. I'll repeat it.
Well, I was narratives from people, but I also found some stuff in a couple of really important dissertations that people had done from the 60s, one from the 80s. Joe Trotter's book was an incredible resource for this project. I mined newspaper articles, and Ms. Thurman had a number of them that really was important. And with COVID, it really cut off my access to a lot of sources. So I just mined the internet, whatever I could find, and so that's one of the places. But the most valuable resource were the people that I talked to.
Another question?
Was it difficult to find a publisher? I don't know anything about this history press, but are they open to other stories that people have wanted to do similar research in their neighborhood with their history?
Okay.
So the question is, how did you find a publisher, and talk a little more about History Press Arcadia?
Well, the Arcadia Press does a lot of work in regional histories. And so, the first book that I read about Bronzeville itself was published by Arcadia Press. And I think that was in like 2006. And actually, that's the last book I think that has been published about Milwaukee Bronzeville. So how did I get, and the History Press is a subsidiary of Arcadia Press. And so I was familiar through, things that I had read that had been published by that publisher. And so I sent an email with my proposal for the book. The next day I got a response. They were extremely interested in that. And, it started from there. I mean, really, literally the next day I got a response, and they, worked with me over the course of time, and the end result was the publication of the book.
The question is, in your research, what surprised you?
What surprised me was how clear the memories of these folks was about, they could remember things from way back. That story I told about Joe Gann, that had me questioning a little bit about memory, but that was one of the things that surprised me. But it told me that the experience that they carried with them through their life was so important. And even the reaction of many of them after the book had been published, to see their lives in print, that surprised me, their reaction to it. What Joe Deku said about, this is like being born again. That surprised me. And again, it emphasized to me the importance of this work. Any more questions? think I started in 2019, or it might have even been 2018 when when I took my tape recorder down to Bill's house and started recording. COVID really interrupted it, because I originally wanted to get 20 people, to put 20 people in with interviews. But COVID just, stopped that in its track. And it also, held up the research. So about 2018. So I have a question. How many people have the book? Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, that's a good question. We do have, whether you bought it from us or not, we know a lot of you bought it from Dr. Jones. So we'll be signing at the front desk. We also have some additional books for sale at the front desk. You will personalize, I assume. I think I'm doing, please, even if you're Sandra's best friend, please let me spell your name out for you. So thank you very much for that. I wanted to thank Dr. Jones and Sharon Adams for a wonderful conversation. What an honor to be hosting you this evening. And we will be sending out a recording afterwards. And I'm sure if you go to the website, I'm sure you'll be doing many more talks. And I'm sure you have a lot more to say. So keep an eye. I bet you have your own website with information coming up.
I don't have a website, but I will.
That's right. So check every day to see if it's up yet.
But I also have information on my Facebook page.
Oh, that's good. That's an excellent session. Thank you all for coming. We wouldn't have a bookstore without you. We hope to see you at another event. Thank you.